right, so we are recording, and today's Webinar Wednesday topic is about personal branding. So just a little bit of refresh on who we are. My name is Laura Sanzoni. I am the Director of Career Development for the CBA Career Center in the College of Business Administration. And Lizzie DeMench, who is not present today, but she is always available for any questions that you have, is career advisor in our office. And she and I are the ones that you would frequently meet with if you have any questions about the subject today, like personal branding or any other career development topics that you might have. So I was going to ask out, what is a personal brand? What does that mean to you? If you don't mind throwing your responses in the chat, that'd be great. What you want to be known for. Okay. So you said what you want to be known for, and that is included in this. So a personal brand, it's a little bit more than that. A personal brand is a recognizable name, reputation that you create for yourself. And a personal brand speaks through how you present yourself in person and online, and a combination of your perspective and the perspective of others. So this is, it is essentially exactly what you said, where it's what you want to be known for, but it's that plus all of this. It's really that reputation piece, but think about what the reputation includes. It includes your in-person presence as well as your online presence. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but don't forget about the fact that you have a perception of what your brand is, but then there's also this outward perception and the reality of what your brand is as well. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how to see where there's overlap and perhaps where there's opportunity for you to improve or maybe bridge the gap a little bit about your perception versus the outward perception of others. So why is personal branding important? So like we talked a little about in terms of perception, you already have a personal brand out there. So you really need to evaluate how others view your brand and if others' perception matches with your personal view of your brand. So just know that if, and we'll talk a little bit about how to figure that out. Again, the brand that exists and what your perception of your brand is. But just know that if your brand, since it already exists, we're going to help you identify your brand and communicate with others today. It's really important to manage your brand to ensure it helps you reach your goals. And it's especially important if others' perception of your brand does not match with how you identify your brand. And I'm going to be saying brand a lot, but you could also, like we talked a little bit on the last slide, you could also be connotating with like what your reputation is. But just know that really it's what, again, just remember, it's what people are going to recognize you for or what you're going to be known for. The branding piece is, if you think about yourself on a team, are you the person that people ask to give the presentation because you're really good at public speaking? Or are you the person that is the go-to for reviewing the data set and making sense of the numbers? And then are you the person that communicates it, reads those numbers and then communicates them out with the team? Or are you all that same person? So just think about when you're on a team, the people that you're like, oh yeah, that person's really great at that. That's exactly what we're talking about. That is that person's brand. So how to begin identifying your personal brand? You really want to think about your strengths. So your strengths are the things that, if you're taking Gallup strengths, that could be a part of this, Clifton Strengths Finder assessment, but also just think about the things you know you're naturally good at. I would take it a step further to say, what are the things that you have talked to a supervisor about, or when they've given you feedback about, these are some things that you're really, really good at. Those are your strengths. So make sure that you are not only getting your strengths and identifying them personally and what you're like, I know I'm really good at this, but also think about that outside perspective, like we were talking about. What if others told you your strengths or helped identify things that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was a strength. It's just something I always do, but others have identified that as a strength. So think about those, list them out, and throughout this whole process, however you process things, whether it's writing it down or documenting it, whether it's talking it out with somebody, think about ways that you're going to be able to process this. If you're a verbal person, a visual person, whatever works for you, make sure that you're documenting this whole process throughout the way. And your brand should be a combination of your beliefs, values, interests, skills, and talents. That's a lot of things, right? But if you think about your beliefs, you know, a lot of your beliefs can come from your upbringing, what you've learned along the way in terms of the different life experiences that you've had. Your values can come from that as well. But don't forget about your interests, you know, just because you and your sibling might have grown up in the same, with the same beliefs and value system, but you're going to have very different interests. So don't ever forget about your interests along the way as well, and how that plays into those beliefs and values. And then your skills and talents. We talked a little about that and your strengths. Your skills and talents are things that you've either you're just naturally good at, but then you've had the opportunity to develop those into more skills or strengths. So make sure that you are aware of all of those things within your branding and how that comes across in both a personal and a professional setting. And you want to be specific about the kind of work that you want to do and the goals that you want to achieve. Now, when we talk about work, I don't necessarily mean a specific job. I mean identifying the type of work that you want to be doing and conducting every day. Do you want to be meeting with people one-on-one? Do you want to be solving problems by reviewing data sets, like I mentioned earlier? Do you want to be looking at numbers all day and making them make sense for other people? You know, and so on and so forth. So that's what I mean by work, is thinking about that kind of work instead of relating it specifically to a job. They can be related to a job, but let's not keep it so specific to a job. Let's make sure we think about the type of work you're actually conducting on a daily basis. And then from there, what are the goals you want to achieve? Now, those goals might be tied to a specific job, but it can also be, okay, I'm starting out as a staff accountant. One day I want to be a CPA. And I want to manage people. There's a lot of different ways to achieve those goals as a CPA. It could be owning your own CPA firm. It could also be working in transitioning to the private sector and becoming a CFO of a really large company and being a manager someday. And there's a lot of steps in between those areas, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to go in one path. There's a lot of different options with those paths. But you can still achieve those goals, right? And that's how, when you're thinking about the work that you want to do and those high level goals, that's going to help you think about how am I going to brand myself so that I can achieve those goals and do that kind of work in the workplace. Self-reflection is key. I would also say it's really a lot of self-awareness, but the reflection piece is really important first, because you need to be reflective of, you know, what all of these things, like we said before. Write down words that you use to describe yourself, and how do you present yourself to your friends and your family. And when I say that, you know, you're typically not working with friends and family, maybe you are, and so then it's really important to get their perspective as both you know, a personal relationship and a professional relationship. But when I meet and audit them, ask them, what are words you would use to describe me as an individual, as a friend, or, you know, a colleague, or just what are the words, just keeping it simple, what word would you use to describe me if you had one word? And then you can see, how do those things align? How do the words that you have align with the words of your friends and family? Once you've done that, create a word cloud of your interests, beliefs, values, etc. So that's where we go back to this beliefs, values, interests, skills, and talents. You really thinking about those strengths and thinking about these pieces as well, and then going down to the audit of yourself as well as of the people in your life. Where do you see the biggest commonalities? Do you all know what I mean when I say a word cloud? You can thumbs up or throw it in the chat. Yes, Katrina says yes. Katrina also has a great idea. Maybe audit clubs and church groups. What do people there recruit you for? Yeah, that's a really good thing as well. You know, there's also like these interest groups that you can definitely consider as well if you're involved in the community at all. They're kind of in this in between where you collaborate with them and work with them, but it might not be a job. But you're conducting, you're working towards goals together with them. Those are great people to audit as well. So yeah, the word cloud is, and there's a lot of really cool platforms out there where you can just dump a bunch of words in, or like a data set of words, and the largest words, the most common words are going to be bigger, and the other smaller words are going to be surrounding it. It's a really cool visual key. I don't think I have an example in this PowerPoint, unfortunately, but it's very powerful to aid in this piece of the words that people use to describe you. In terms of this audit, I have literally seen people develop surveys where it might be a 1 or 2 question survey of what's your name, how do you know me, and what word would you use to describe me and why. Okay, so that's 4 questions, but it can be that simple, and that's where you can begin to get the data set, and you can do it once a year, once every 2 years, 3 years, whatever, once every 6 months. This is and that will aid in addition to your own self-reflection and self-awareness and writing down again the words that you use to describe you. It's going to help you with this word cloud as well. The word cloud, like I said, can be quite visual and helpful, and there's a lot of other ways that you can approach this. It doesn't have to be a word cloud. I just think there's a lot of value in the visual piece of the word cloud, but I'm sure there's a lot of other great ways to go about this as well. Make sure to get that outside perspective. I think when I say audit your friends and family, they're that outside perspective, but don't be afraid to go a step further and include any colleagues, any, like I said, people like classmates, people in organizations that you're a part of or that you collaborate with or volunteer with. Make sure you get that outside perspective as well, because that's the other thing. It goes back to what's my perception of my reputation and what's the actual perception. Maybe you have a very different brand or reputation in the different groups of people. There's nothing wrong with that, but is there anything consistent? And if it's not consistent, is there a way to develop some consistency so that your brand is consistent across all aspects of your life? And if it's not consistent, and it's very, very drastically different, I think that would be worth a conversation as well, or some self-reflection on your end. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, why am I so different? Why is the perception of myself, my brand, so different across all these different aspects of my life? I would be hard pressed to find that that's actually the case, but you never know, right? So it's just always things to consider. So once you've taken all these pieces and put them together, I would hope that you would be able to take the next step and put together a phrase that identifies you and your personal brand. So this is kind of like your elevator pitch of how you would describe yourself to somebody the first time you're meeting them. So I use myself as an example. And I do both a job and a personal example, because when I'm explaining my job and I'm meeting somebody in the workplace, I'm going to use a little bit of a different intro compared to people that maybe I'm meeting out in the community or outside of the workplace. So in the job focused example, after doing all of these things with my strengths, like an audit, thinking about feedback that I've received throughout the years, this is how I would describe myself and introduce myself. I am a higher education professional that helps coach and advise students in preparing for their future careers that intentionally mirror their interests. So there's a lot of, this took me longer than you think to write this really simple sentence, but this is how I would describe myself. This would be like my brand, my tagline, whatever you want to call it, in the workplace. And personally, I would say I'm a skilled communicator with a passion for helping others identify their skills and interests to increase their confidence in themselves and enhance their life. So there's a lot of commonalities, but I do take it a step further personally, because it's not so specific in terms of students, careers, education. It's more about overallness of who I am as a person and how I am as your friend, your family member, what have you. At least this is how I feel. And this is how a lot of friends would say that and agree with this as well, because having done the audit myself, right? Does anybody have any questions about this? I think this is a really good practice for yourself. And like I said, I wouldn't necessarily get to this place until you go through all of these steps, just because I think this is going to be I think you might have a hard time getting to this place without doing some of these first pieces of identifying your own brand. But again, once you've gone through these steps, and it doesn't have to take that long. It can take as long as you want it to. It can take as a short time frame as you want it to. But are you going to be able to get all this feedback and all of this, self-reflection in to be able to get to this place? And I could probably stand to reevaluate this myself. This is something I did a couple semesters ago when we first started giving this presentation. And while I still agree with this, There are probably some more things I could add now after a couple of years of additional work experience and life experience under my belt. But I do still really stand by this. So that's something to think about as well. Is it worth reevaluating your personal brand and going through this process again? After maybe some big life changes. We've had a child since then. Since I've done this, there's been a really big pandemic since this has happened. It has that affected my personal brand. And looking at this now, I would say no. It's still the same, but I would maybe go a little bit further. That would be but again, things to think about. So these are some common student questions that we get in terms of, thinking about it from the employer perspective. So something that students tend to ask me is what kind of brands do employers look for? Brands, right? When is the best time to share a personal brand with employers? And do employers check social media for brand discrepancies? And if so, what do they look for in profiles? I share this because we have had some employers co-present this with us before, and this is something that I do ask a lot of employers when I'm meeting with them. I think the student that originally asked this question, when they say brands, they meant, is there a certain type of candidate or a brand, if you will, of candidate that employers look for? The answer is no, but it does depend on the needs of the job in terms of does the candidate's actions throughout the entire job service process align with what you're looking for in the job. And also, if you meet somebody at a career fair, like a recruiter at a career fair, you're able to share your brand more upfront than you would if you're applying to a job prior to meeting with anyone at the company. So it's not that they look for specific brands; they look really for consistency. This is what I've heard. So if you say that you're a strong communicator and that you have an attention to detail, show that throughout the entire process. Be the first to send the email and say thank you, or initiate it's great to meet you, look forward to meeting you again. As well as, showing that attention to detail. It was great meeting you at this specific event. Looking forward to connecting with you at this event that we talked about. I would be very impressed because you're not only standing by what you're saying with your attention to detail and your communication skills, but you're also really taking the effort, showing me your effort and willingness to move forward in whatever job search process we may be in. That kind of goes along with the best time to share the personal brand. And so when we think about the brand, it's this tagline, kind of this tagline here. This is what we're talking about when we say when's the best time to share this. I would say the best time to share that is a couple different places. When you first meet them, like for example, at a career fair or a networking event, when you're first introducing yourself, don't be afraid to use that. That's kind of like your elevator pitch, right? You want it to be 15 to 30 seconds? Well, there's your pitch right there. That's your brand that you can share with them. It's also a really good opportunity to share this with them in the question, tell me about yourself, which is usually how most employers start interviews, at least in every interview that I've had. That's exactly how employers start the interview. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. That's a really great time to start strong with your brand and say, this is who I am. And then again, use all the opportunities in your further conversation to show consistently how your brand aligns with what you've shared and what they're looking for. So that's really the best time. It's not really like if somebody said, hey, how's the weather today? And you're like, you know what, the weather looks great, but let me share my personal brand with you. It's a little bit awkward, not really the best time. So you do have to think thoughtfully about when does it make sense to share their brand with them. And I personally think those are the most natural times to share your personal brand and all that with them. Do employers check social media for brand discrepancies? Yes and no. So I would say err on the side of caution and assume that your social media profile is being checked by employers. Now, there are a lot of companies that have a lot of HR regulations where they might not allow hiring managers or recruiters to check social media, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening. And I'm not saying that because of anything I specifically heard. I'm just saying that from the extremely cautious person in me, that knowing that just because there's some rules out there, that doesn't mean if people have continued to do it, they might do it in the future, in terms of checking your social media presence. So social media includes LinkedIn, which is more of a professional social media site, but also all the other platforms that you're on. So a couple good ways to alleviate this, if you want to keep your social media very private, make sure that your accounts are on private, because whether there is a brand discrepancy or not, do you really want them to be able to check your social media and your private life prior to getting the position? Personally, I would say no, simply because again, I don't want them to think one thing about me and then I get in the job and get the job, or I have maybe dispelled a first impression that was really great. And I say that with knowing that there's a lot of factors and variables that usually go into this conversation, but just essentially be cognizant. And employers have specifically said that there are things that they've seen that can definitely change their opinion of a candidate because of how they present themselves in person in the job search process versus how they present themselves personally in their social media profiles. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that ultimately, no matter who you're working for, you're still representing that company on all facets, whether we like it or not. It's just the fact of the matter. If someone knows where you work and maybe you have a certain brand on social media or you post certain types of things, that's something to consider. What do they look for in profiles? I don't think they necessarily look for anything in particular. It's more of that consistency, like we were talking about. So I just say in this particular instance, make sure you just keep your social media private so that people can't, follow you and look up in the job search process if there's things in your profile you don't really think are relevant to your job search. Just err on the side of caution is what I would recommend. Or just make sure there's consistency, or both, whatever you're comfortable with. So we've talked a lot about how to determine your brand, identify your brand, share your brand with employers, but here's how to portray your brand in all settings. So we're going to talk about when you're in person, in writing, and online. How are you going to portray your brand, reputation, who you are across all aspects of your life? So interviewing is going to be one of the most common ways to showcase your brand in person. We've talked a little bit about this already, but just know that interviewing is, there's a lot of high stakes with interviewing, right? Because you're looking for a job, you're hoping to get a job, and specifically that position that you're interviewing for. So you really want to be cognizant that whatever maybe you met them in person at a career fair or a networking event, make sure that you're being consistent with your interview. But if this is a time when you haven't met the recruiters yet or the hiring managers, because maybe you've applied and you were asked in for an interview and you hadn't met anyone at the company otherwise, just know that Tell Me About Yourself, like I said, is really the perfect opportunity to share your brand. And really take it a step further and think about the words in the job description. So note the common words or descriptors used in the job description, and do they match your brand? And make sure to provide examples of how your brand matches with what the employer is looking for. And this doesn't all have to happen in the Tell Me About Yourself question, because realistically, you want that to be a pretty short and sweet answer. But you can sprinkle it in throughout the conversation. Like if they say they're looking for a self-starter and you've been told that you're really independent worker and really great at getting projects started and completed, which all those things mean self-starter, right? You can make sure to talk about it very briefly in the Tell Me About Yourself. Don't be afraid to bring it up at different times throughout the interview as well, as it makes sense in response to whatever questions that they might have. So again, the interview is going to be really the best place for in-person showcasing your brand. But don't forget about those other events. Even if you have a job and you're like, maybe I don't want to stay at this job, but I want to stay at this company. You're always putting yourself out there to be considered for another job at the company, especially if it's a large company. So that's the in-person branding as well. Interviewing is just what gets you into that first job or that first interaction or that first opportunity at said company, or maybe your first opportunity to get professional experience. But don't forget that there's a lot of other ways that you're showcasing your brand in person as well. And remember the verbal and nonverbal interactions. Now, this is specific to interviewing, but this again can go across a lot of different aspects of in-person connection as well. So what's the speed of conversation? Are you a really fast talker? And if so, does that show that you're nervous or are you just really excited? about the topic that you're discussing at the moment. What's your handshake? Now, there's a question mark with this because anymore, especially with the pandemic, I don't quite know how many people are comfortable with handshakes. I don't think they've completely gone away, but just be cognizant that some people might not be comfortable with handshakes the way that we once were. But just know that if you are going to go in for a handshake and if the other person is going to give you the handshake back, that you want it to be a firm handshake. You don't want it to be, there's definitely an art to the handshake. And I won't spend all the time talking about this today because this is a virtual presentation, but just know that you do want to have a really good handshake if you're going to be giving one at that moment with that person. And your posture. So this one is actually really easy to demonstrate here virtually. You know, when you think about your posture, if I'm leaning forward like this, I'm much more engaged in the conversation. But if I'm leaning back and if I'm kind of leaning to the side, I don't really look like I'm excited to be there, right? You probably all had a very different vibe of me giving this presentation. So that's not only something to consider in person, but also virtually if you're having a remote interview. So don't forget about your posture. It's a really lot of body language if you haven't noticed. But also think about your word choices. There are some word choices that just have negative connotations to them, no matter how accurate they are. So think about what those word choices are. And if you want to practice what good word choices, good positive word choices, you can utilize Big Interview to complete a virtual interview, and then they have an artificial intelligence algorithm that reviews your interview questions and then gives you feedback on specific things on like authenticity, word choice. Do you use the word too much? Did you talk too fast? All these things I'm talking about. You can practice these through an interview. Eye contact is huge. You don't want to have too much eye contact, but you don't want to have that enough. So be cognizant of all these things because that just shows it doesn't necessarily affect your personal brand specifically, but it can aid or perhaps change that. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. I'm glad that you all found Big Interview so helpful. It's one of my favorite tools that we have. So if you haven't used it, yes, Katrina's used it and love it. It's one of my favorite tools. It's awesome. And that's a really good place to practice all of these for the interview setting, but keep in mind that these translate to more than just interviews, just really general conversation. Are there any questions about this? Okay, so this, we kind of talked a little about this, but this is how you're going to be able to bring all of that work about identifying your personal brand together. I would call this more of a personal pitch anymore as opposed to an elevator speech because this is something that you can be used in a lot of different settings. It's just really a quick summary of yourself. And so all this work will be the auditing, the self-reflection, really you taking the time to identify your strengths, talents, values, all that can go into this. Now, this is a really straightforward example here because Jessica's example has a very specific goal in mind. She's at a career fair, but you can really take this and amp it up to include your personal brand. So in this example, the person says, "Hello, I'm Jessica Hill. I'm an accounting major that will graduate this spring, and I'm looking for opportunities in the Omaha area with both insurance and finance companies." It's nice to meet you. That's what the employer is saying that she's working with. But you can take this a step further. So this really gets to the point of Jessica's goals, but we want to talk a little bit about ourselves and our personal brand. So don't forget to mention who you are. What do you do? And what do you do in this context? Most of you on this call, you're students, but so you can say that. But you can also say, and if you're working currently, for me, I would say I'm a higher ed professional working in career services. That's what I would say. Or if you're in between roles, you can say that. Just say, I'm currently in between positions, but I'm really passionate about X, Y, Z. So you really want to identify what are you doing in the moment. And then hopefully that can lead to what do you want to do, right? Which is the next line. What are your goals? You can talk about your goals. It can be a small goal like this. This is a big goal for Jessica, but it's small in the sense that it's a relatively short time frame because she's graduating in the spring and she's looking for opportunities in the Omaha area with insurance and finance. It's a very specific goal. So you can identify if you're at a networking event, you can say my goals are I'm here to just learn more about this new profession that I joined, just hoping to make some connections in the area. That's all. It can be as simple as that. And then considering your brand strengths, values, skills, talents, and that we've been discussing today, how can you pepper that in? So again, I would talk about, yeah, I'm a higher ed professional, really passionate about helping students identify their intentional career goals. And I'm really hoping to make connections today to learn a little bit more about how I can better serve them. That's me sort of sharing my personal pitch at perhaps like a networking event or a conference of some kind. So once you nail down a personal pitch, you really can evolve it, and it can change for the settings, but it doesn't have to change that much. It can just be very slight, and you can use it in a lot of different settings throughout your entire working career, right? So don't be afraid to, if you really put in the work now, you can get something really honed and solid so that you don't necessarily feel taken aback if you're ever in a surprising situation. I personally think that this practice really sets you up for success to take advantage of opportunities and connections in the moment, right? I hope that makes sense. So moving into the writing. So what we mean by this is, like I was saying earlier, consistency across all documents. So that includes your resumes, any cover letters if the employer is asking for one, as well as your social media presence, which I'll talk about in a minute. But really, there are some companies that maybe they want you to write like a personal statement, or maybe you're applying to grad school or a professional program, making sure that you're consistently showing who you are through all those documents. Now, a resume seems like, oh, well, I'm just listing what I did at a job, right? But what you did at a job showcases your skills, talents, and the beginnings of your brand. So make sure that you're being consistent and making sure that the documents seem like they go together. They come from the same person, really. So whether it's in formatting, also content that you're sharing, make sure that they all belong to the same person. Be clear and articulate through your documents. This allows your brand to come through. So this is more specific about communication style specifically, but you really want the reader to not have any questions about who you are, what you bring to the table, and what your brand is. So it's really helpful to have multiple people review these documents. You don't necessarily have to have someone review them every single time you apply for a job, but if you have a really good base, base master resume and cover letter, you can really begin to understand with a lot of feedback from others in prepping your master resume and cover letter, that you can change it to meet the needs of whatever you're applying for, whether it's a scholarship, whether it's a grant, maybe a job or promotion, what have you. But this basically, you just want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding in the written documentation, because that can happen. It's not unheard of. So make sure you have a lot of eyes look at this. Make sure it's multiple people from different perspectives. That's something we do all the time here in the Career Center. We look at cover letters, resumes, job applications all the time. So we're always happy to meet with you and review your documentations and give you the feedback that you're looking for. The other thing is be responsive. So if you're applying for a lot of jobs, or internships, or whatever you're applying for at the time, make sure that you're checking your email. Make sure that if they call you and leave you a voicemail, make sure your voicemail's not full. Make sure that you are answering the call or responding to them promptly if they leave a voicemail, right? So make sure that that kind of aids in your brand. So maybe you're not necessarily known as someone to get back super quickly with emails or phone calls. But in the case of a first initial impression, whether it's through a job search or maybe an internship search, you don't want to be known upfront as the non-responsive person, basically. And again, it all goes together. It's going to all flow into your brand. It's those nonverbal and those intangible things that aid in your brand as well. And that's really where this conversation of branding yourself and writing comes into play. Social media recommendations. Excuse me. So like I talked about earlier, you got to be just self-aware of what your social media presence looks like and how does that affect your brand, or if at all. So just be aware that your social media stays with you forever. I have had Facebook for a very long time now. It's been around as long as I was in college. If that ages myself a little bit, but basically I have posts on the internet for whenever Facebook started, almost 2 decades ago now. So those posts still exist. I personally would have to search really hard to find them, but I know that they're out there. And just be aware of that. And are you okay with other people seeing that, even if it was from 10, 15 years ago? I'll be honest, I'm not necessarily fully comfortable with that, but I keep all my social media private for that reason because I've had it for so long. And that's just me in my specific instance, but keep that in mind with yourself and whatever, wherever you're at in whatever search or maybe rebranding you're trying to do for yourself. It's something also super simple. Google your name, what comes up? Do some of those old social media posts come up? Do maybe articles about yourself come up? Do they come up? Like what else comes up, and are you okay with that? And not necessarily that you might not necessarily be able to change that, but if you're okay with it, just make sure that you're aware of what's out there. And if you're not okay with it, you also again want to make sure you're aware of what's out there. We talked a little bit about LinkedIn, but to take it a step further, there's a couple different ways to brand yourself professionally on LinkedIn. Make sure that you use a professional headshot. The reason why the headshot is a little bit better than, say, a quick selfie is, I don't know about you, but especially at the time when this picture was taken, my camera phone was not nearly as good as the picture that was taken professionally for my first job here at UNO. Now, I will say, I would argue now that my camera is really great. So, and I think LinkedIn on the profile or on the app has, you can just take a quick picture and they have a really, I think a lot of really great filters and ways to edit the photo. I think it can look great as well, but just make sure, since it is such a small photo, make sure that it's you. Make sure that people can identify who you are up front. And there are ways that if you want to keep your LinkedIn profile private, people might not be able to see your profile if they aren't connected to you or like connected to a friend who's connected to you. You can set those settings up if that's what you want to do. But when people are connected with you, make sure that you have a professional headshot. I don't know about you, but when I see people that don't have professional headshots in my network or that ask to be connected to me, I don't accept them because I think it's like a spam account trying to like do some phishing and get all kinds of crazy viruses on my computer, which I don't want. And make sure to customize your headline. This is the headline right here. So there's a couple different ways you can approach this. You do not have to list your current job title. Mine does list my job title. You could also take this approach as Linda Evans here, this is not her job title, but this is part of her brand. So my job title is really part of my brand right now in my life, but for Linda specifically, personal branding is her brand. She's a writer and a speaker. She's a strengths-based career coach. So she has taken her brand a step further. Neither of them are wrong. It's just an additional way that you can add a layer to your branding out in the world. And there's a couple different ways to approach it. Any questions on this? So that was all I really had today. These are some takeaways, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you're not quite sure where to get started. But just know your brand already exists, so make sure that your brand matches with others' perspective of your brand. And we talked about a few ways to do that. Doing an audit of friends and family, and that audit can be formal through like a Google search, like a form that you want to send out, or an email, or it can just be candid conversations and you just make note of them somehow. But just make sure that you feel that your brand that you identify with for yourself matches what the others' outward perception is. And use the steps we discussed today to help put your brand into words. That's going to be key because you want to be able to notate this, whether it's in your LinkedIn profile, whether it's in your job application documents, whether it's through email communication, right? Depending on how you're connecting with someone. And just be consistent. Whatever your brand is, make sure you're showing that consistently in all aspects of your life. That's gonna go further than all of these things combined. Just meaning consistency and showing who you are to the people that you're connecting with. That was it. If you do have any questions about this, we can definitely look over like a LinkedIn profile. We can talk to you about your resume, cover letter. If you're not quite sure where to go from here, with how to incorporate this into your job and internship search, let us know. We're happy to meet with you. You can email us or call us, or you can schedule an appointment through Handshake. But that was all that I had today. Let me stop sharing.